Hello and welcome to Simple Time Studios, where I recount epic tales of solo roleplay for your entertainment. Today we have our second full episode of Axman Chronicles, exploring the consequences of Flint's previous adventure. Flint is now level 3 Wise Hunter. Enjoy! The wind whipped and howled around Jacob Flint as he trudged through the knee-deep snow. The snow-laden pine trees cast long shadows on the white ground as he cradled his shotgun and slowly walked along. It was getting dark soon, and the snowstorm was starting to pick up. He needed to find shelter soon, and ideally his target as well. And he definitely needed to get dug in and set up some traps before they found him again. What a way to spend the week before Christmas. He fought to avoid shivering as his index finger caressed the outside of his shotgun trigger guard. Occasionally he would stop and try to listen for the sound of snow crunching beneath feet that weren't his. It was so hard to hear, and with the light fading fast, it was hard to see as well. Yet he did not stop and attempt to start a fire where he stood. They would be able to see that, and currently they were still better equipped for this hunt than he was. A few days earlier, it had just been over a month since his last little adventure in the woods rescuing those two city kids from an autumn hiking trip that was going to give them nightmares for the rest of their lives. The debriefing interviews were almost as extensive as the interrogations of those three psychos they caught. Special Agent Abrams made sure of that. The kids were grilled on everything that happened to them. Jacob gave a lengthy account of everything that happened from the moment Sheriff Quimby sent him off on his own to the moment he was reunited with the search party. And after reopening his old case, Jacob was questioned on the kidnapping on his brother and himself. He thought he was better prepared, but those old memories still stung as he recounted the kidnapping, the time in captivity, his escape, the last time he saw his brother alive, and the fiasco that followed. No matter, he already knew the outcome, and he was not surprised when he didn't hear a thing about it after the FBI left. Even if it wasn't Abrams' intent, that's how it almost always ended. At least this time there wasn't someone getting him fitted for a few months in a straitjacket. Still, the rescue hadn't left his mind. He knew they would know who he was the moment eyes told the others what happened. He began reflecting on his performance and how to improve. He went shopping for new equipment and traded in his old double-barreled shotgun for one with a pump action. And he spent time working on his homestead, clearing his mind while making sure everything was in order for the winter months. Thanksgiving came and went. He spent it alone, much like he did for a few years now. The few family members he did not have a strained relationship with had been dead for a couple years, so Thanksgiving was a relatively quiet dinner enjoyed alone. Lonely, but preferable to family that did not understand why he lived alone and assumed he spent all his time having sex with cows or sheep, ignoring the fact that doing such a thing would have been preferable to listening to them anyway. As the snow came and the Christmas season got into full swing, he had gotten a phone call he never expected. "Hello, is this the Flint residence?" A vaguely familiar female voice called from the other end of the phone. "Yes, this is, and I'm not interested in an extended auto warranty," Flint replied as he cleaned off the kitchen counter. The voice laughed. "Sheriff Quimby should have warned me that you were a joker on the phone. It's Agent Abrams from the FBI. You worked with us before to find Annabelle and Clemens." Jacob Flint put down the dish he had been hand-washing and focused on the call. "Someone still has questions about that?" The FBI agent exhaled. "No. Strangest thing. Just when I was making headway, I'm called to handle a different missing persons case, and that case was promptly transferred to someone else, and no one will tell me who." "Well, what's the Latin phrase? Déjà vu? I'm getting the feeling you didn't call me just to tell me that a case I was involved with got buried. Again." "What's going on?" Jacob replied, peering out out the kitchen window to make sure there wasn't anything outside that wasn't supposed to be there. He could already tell he wasn't going to like where this conversation was going. I'm suspicious of this new case. A lot of it is just too convenient, which is why I'm calling you on my personal phone instead of my work phone, Abrams replied. What about it is convenient? Despite the trouble he knew was coming, Jacob had to smile. Abrams was smart. They would have a hard time putting her down so long as she played her cards right. Case concerns an Australian citizen that was visiting family in the States over the holidays and was reported missing about 2 weeks ago. Tracking his phone before it went dead took us to the White Crest Mountains National Park, but his profile shows no obvious reason why he would go there. My request for a Bureau SAR tracker was denied almost immediately, and I was given a list of local wilderness trackers that were certified or otherwise had an established reputation with law enforcement instead. And my name was on the list, he replied. Yes, this was going exactly where he thought it was going. Don't be so humble. Your name was at the top of the list, she countered, her tone making it clear that the retaliation he had been anticipating was here. Well then, as your most highly recommended consultant, do you know how far away the WCM National Park is, right? And how remote it is? He responded. His words may have read like a joke, but his tone was anything but. He knew both of them were getting set up. The only choice for him was whether he went along with it willingly or if someone would take that choice away from him. North of Buffalo, New York, and about 25 miles from the nearest town. A town that Google Maps says is little more than a no-name truck stop. The AFP officer sent to collaborate with us is already having trouble coping with the thought of an unreliable cell signal. AFP? The Australian Federal Police? He replied, trying hard to keep the shock out of his voice. Nah, there was no way. That little adventure had to be 8 years ago, but now. The same. And don't worry, I read their file on you. We'll talk about it when you get up here. Can you be here in 2 days? She replied, giving him the name of the town and a diner up there to meet them at. He exhaled. All right, I'll see you there then. He was considerably less convinced than Abrams was that this was going to end well. But at the same time, he knew that if they were really involved, it was either get involved this way or somehow get kidnapped in the middle of the night and end up in a cell next to Abrams' missing Australian. At least this way he could go in armed. A day later, he packed his equipment into his truck, tossed his shotgun and a box of shells in the back seat with the rest of his gear, and casually drove all the way north to the little town of White Crest. Named for the almost perpetually snow-capped mountains they sat at the foot of, this little corner of New England Appalachia was about what he expected. A main road that intersected with a state highway, a handful of small houses with covered wood piles, every bit as big as the houses themselves, stacked up right against the siding, a handful of small farms with irregularly shaped flat acreages covered with a thin layer of snow, and nothing else except a squat concrete dollar store and an aging diner that looked like it was taken out of a Norman Rockwell painting. Those were the only things he could find so far. What he currently didn't see was a motel. He wasn't expecting a major hotel chain to be out here, but with White Crest being one of the few towns between Buffalo and the Canadian border, he still thought there would be some small local motel for travelers caught in a storm. Checking his map and reviewing the weather forecast on his phone, he grimaced at the forecast for the next few days. Snow, and a lot of it from the looks of it. On the positive, it looked like the actual park of White Crest wasn't too far from the town of the same name, and it looked like there was a ranger station at the park entrance. Perhaps there was someone there he could talk to, or at least a map he could study while he waited for Abrams to arrive tomorrow. The drive over to the park entrance was short, and he soon pulled up in front of a small visitor center and a small dirt road leading deeper into the dense forest beyond. Small metal gate propped up on waist-high concrete barricades blocked vehicle traffic. Parking, Jacob climbed out of his truck and started looking at the signs dotting the gate and the visitor center. As suspected, the park was closed for the season, and off-season visitation was at one's own risk. There was an emergency number printed at the bottom of one particular sign that Jacob knew was to report poachers and the like. But then he found the sign he was looking for, a blown-up map of the immediate area that highlighted points of interest and any man-made structures deeper in the park. Okay, going to make 2 skill checks right now. First is survival to determine if he can find any locations that look like a good shelter. The second is a perception check to see how distracted he is. Survival comes out to a total of 19, while his perception is also a total of 19. Looks like this might be a better session than his first time. Guess these dice are finally warming up to me. Studying the map took up a lot of his attention, but not so much that he didn't hear the person walking up behind him. "Can I help you?" a stern voice asked with no small amount of suspicion. Jacob realized he didn't have a particularly convincing story to tell the park rangers why they should trust him. Yet when he turned to face the stern, middle-aged park ranger interrogating him, the other man's expression immediately melted. "Wait, I know you. You're the Mountain Man." "The who?" Jacob asked. The ranger pulled out his smartphone and, after briefly cursing how unreliable the Wi-Fi was out at the station, brought up a news article that read, "Mountain Man finds missing hikers." "You're the Mountain Man that found those kids back in October. Some FBI lady called and said she was coming up tomorrow with you and a couple other lawmen to look for a missing Aussie or something." Jacob suddenly had 100 questions, as his exploits never made the news before, but right now he was grateful that he didn't have to make up some lie about wanting to do some ice fishing. "Yeah, I'm Jacob Flint. We're here looking for a missing Australian that disappeared about a week or 2 ago. I see a couple places on the map where he could find some kind of shelter if he's still alive. You remember seeing someone with an accent a couple weeks ago?" The ranger rubbed his chin in contemplation. "Unfortunately, no. I would have remembered someone that talked like Steve Irwin, may that man's soul rest in peace. But you know how it is. If foreigners leave New York City, they're going to Niagara Falls or heading to wine country over in the Finger Lakes. When we first heard that someone went missing around here, we checked all the places you probably spotted on the map and a few you probably didn't think of. Didn't find him or his body." "That ravine that runs to the side of the main trail over here?" Jacob asked, pointing to its location on the map. "Nope," the ranger replied with a shake of his head. "The fishing cabins over by the river here?" the hunter asked, gesturing to another likely location. "Not a damn trace." The ranger shook his head again. "Well then, if he's still out there, then the only other possibility is this hunting lodge right..." "If he's still alive, he's probably there," the ranger answered as he got a worried look in his eye. "What makes you so sure?" Jacob asked, crossing his arms as he regarded the weathered park ranger with a raised eyebrow. "It's the only place we haven't checked. And before you ask, it's because there's been strange things going on there since the spring. Weird lights from the lodge windows, lots of activity on roads normally used by poachers, occasional screams," the ranger explained with a shudder. "You didn't try investigating or getting help?" Jacob asked incredulously. This was not what he expected. One did not screw with rangers in the employ of the state or federal park service. They were trained to deal with bears, bisons, and other creatures the size of small cars. "Our budget got slashed 3 times this year between state and federal cuts. We don't have the resources to do anything about it ourselves. And as for other agencies, I've been sending requests to the state troopers and the FBI regional branch in NYC since this started. Nearly 9 months later, all I get is 2 FBI agents, 1 Aussie cop, and you. The ranger replied, pausing to spit at the ground. No offense, he added. None taken, Jacob replied with deadpan serious. This was definitely not good. If this was not where the missing person had ended up, it was definitely something that someone needed to follow up on. Anyway, here's my card if she wants to call me and talk to me herself. The ranger handed Jacob a small slip of thick cardstock. Anton Smith? Flint said, reading the card out loud. Yep, that's me. Ranger Anton Smith smiled with a weathered grin. All right, I'll pass this along when I meet up with the others tomorrow. Any chance you know where I can get a copy of the map over there or find a room for the night? The hunter asked. A few minutes later, Jacob Flint had both a small paper map and directions to a nearby motel where he could spend the night. And the strange feeling that something was watching him. Okay, perception check versus stealth check. Flint gets a 9 on his perception. The Whistler gets a 15 on its stealth check. Turning his head, Jacob could have sworn he caught a fleeting glimpse of a distant figure disappearing into the forest. Something tall and covered in gray fur. A strange whistling sound echoed through the naked trees. With the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end, Jacob hopped back into his truck and headed back into town and checked into a hotel room for the night. By morning, the strange incident after his meeting with a park ranger was completely forgotten. Early next morning, he received a call from Abrams to meet them at the diner. While dreading the encounter, he decided to just get it over with. The drive to the diner was uneventful. He pulled into the parking lot outside and walked in. The interior of the diner was as small and as classic as the exterior outside. A row of booths lined the window overlooking the street outside, while polished counters separated the kitchen from the dining area. So there was no hiding from the trio of female police officers seated at the corner table, and there was no pretending he didn't see them either. So he walked over and looked at Abrams. Hello, Abrams. I see I was not the only one that tried to get started early on this, he greeted. Well, hello to you too, mate, came a stern female voice he hadn't heard in 8 years. Special Agent Abrams laughed. Glad you can make it, Mr. Jacob Flint. When did you get here? Jacob took a seat at Abrams' side of the booth. Not just because there was only one person on her side, but because he wanted to have a table between him and the Aussie on the other side. I got here yesterday afternoon. Tried to see what I could find out quietly without stirring up too much of a fuss. He began, pulling out the business card he got from Anton, the park ranger, and gave it to Abrams. Got the contact information of one of the on-duty park rangers. Got a map of the area. Got a lead you might be able to make more sense of than I can. And I learned I'm apparently a celebrity now, he replied, doing his best to avoid looking at the Australian on the other side of the table. Abrams looked at Flint for a moment before the realization hit her. Oh, the mountain man story. Annabelle's family is well connected and loved talking about themselves, so they tried to run this sensational story about how she was saved by a roughneck cowboy that enjoyed a primitive existence in the backwoods. I wanted to get it taken down because it was attracting attention into our investigation. Then apparently someone else told her family to stop talking about you in that camp or there would be issues. I tried tracking this person down, but they disappeared without a trace. Flint raised an eyebrow. A noble savage story? Really? But I'm getting off track here, he replied, trying to pull the map out of his pocket just as the waitress came by with the breakfast orders for Abrams and the others. All right, I have 2 steak and eggs, 1 short stack of pancakes with blueberries, and 3 coffees. And can I get you anything, sir? The waitress, some teenager doing her best to be polite and clearly working her first job ever, smiled nervously. "Well, I never saw the menu, so do you have waffles?" Jacob asked politely. "Yes, sir, we do." "All right, I'll have waffles with syrup and butter, and a glass of orange juice," he ordered. The waitress scribbled down his order, nodded, and immediately walked off to give it to the cook behind the counter. "Waffles? The mighty hunter that Special Agent Abrams spoke so highly of eats waffles for breakfast? I thought we were getting a professional tracker," came the stern Australian accent again. "Not a fan of being ignored, are you, Constable First Class Cynthia Summers?" "It's still Constable, right?" Flint replied, looking directly and making eye contact with Cynthia Summers for the first time since sitting down. Cynthia Summers was a stern, lanky, blonde woman that managed to convey a sense of towering over Jacob Flint despite sitting down and looking like a stiff breeze could blow her over. "It's Sergeant now. Would have been an inspector if it hadn't been for a certain American that managed to evade police protection and escape the country under a forged passport, then completely disappeared once he landed in Los Angeles. All while still being a teenager." Jacob exhaled and briefly turned to Abrams. "Sorry for getting you roped into this." He then turned back to Sergeant Summers. "Considering it took Special Agent Abrams a month instead of 8 years to figure out that you don't mess with the people that got us all reunited, maybe you're just not cut out for police work?" Summers scowled and opened her mouth to say something, but Abrams interjected. "So it is true then? What were you doing in Australia?" Whatever Summers had planned to say, she apparently decided it wasn't as interesting as the answer to Abrams' question. Jacob sighed. "You remember those people we annoyed when we went looking for Annabelle and Clemens? You remember how they quietly railroaded you into taking this case which is an obvious trap? Yeah, if you don't take the bait, they decide to stop being subtle and just kidnap you in the middle of the night. That's how I ended up in a temporary hunting camp in the middle of the outback. Thankfully, they at least left me with a pair of jeans and some shoes. As for what happened afterwards, that story can wait until after we find this guy," he replied, trying to get back on topic as the waitress returned with his waffles and orange juice. Thanking the waitress, he started digging into his breakfast. "So who is this guy? What does he look like? And do you have a better idea why he would go all the way out here?" he asked between bites of food. "I have most of that right here, Jacob," came the voice of the other FBI agent accompanying Abrams. "Thanks, Olivia," he replied, his voice softening a crack as he looked up at the younger agent accompanying Abrams, an agent about as old as he was. "Congratulations on getting into and graduating from the FBI Academy," he added as he took the manila file from her and opened it. "Conrad G. Brooks. Any relation to the fantasy author?" he asked as he read the name at the bottom of the photograph tucked away in the folder. "None whatsoever. Keep reading," Summers replied dismissively. Jacob rolled his eyes but kept reading aloud softly. "IT professional with one of the biggest companies in Eastern Australia. No public religious affiliation. Hobbies include video games, 3D printing, and robotics. Was most recently seen at an anime convention called Smash." He looked at Summers with a raised eyebrow, then quickly skimmed the rest of the file, only to find that that was the entire file. "Nothing here on his family here in the States?" he asked. "We didn't think there was a need," Summers replied. "There also wasn't anything to find that stood out." "Nothing at all," Abrams added, looking slightly more disturbed about it than Summers should have been. "Okay," Jacob Flint began, handing the file back to Olivia. "So all you know about Mr. Brooks is that he's a massive nerd that is at least 100 miles away from anything remotely nerdy. You know nothing about his family or any friends he might have had in this country, much less anything that would motivate them to bring him all the way out here. We have to find him or what's left of him before a big snowstorm comes by in the next few days. And unless one of you has heard anything else, the only real lead I know we have is that there is something creepy going down at a hunting camp deep in the forest. Although I'm not sure if the park ranger that told me about it didn't have an ulterior motive for sending someone with a gun out looking that way. Not the most impossible tracking case I was brought in to consult on, but definitely looking like the worst, he replied, quickly finishing his breakfast. You're not disgusted by... Summers, stop making yourself look like an idiot by trying to paint as a redneck bigot. Honestly, the creepiest part of that profile is that you had everything down to the brand of breakfast cereal he likes to eat. And after the Halloween nonsense I saw back in October, nothing would make me happier than if this turned out to be some weird anime LARP instead of what it currently looks like. Which is what? Summers asked. Jacob glanced at the rest of the diner to make sure no one was currently listening to him. The last case of your careers, he answered cryptically. Oh, this is getting ridiculous. Let's pay our bill and get out of here. Summers scowled and finished her breakfast. For once, Flint could not argue with Summers' logic. Quickly finishing his breakfast, he promptly paid his tab and followed the others. Getting back into his truck, he met up with them again at the gate to the park. The 3 officers were already out and talking to Anton by the gate. Jacob got out of his truck, made sure his coat was fully buttoned up, then pulled out his backpack and slung his shotgun over his shoulder. Whatever conversation they had with Anton was finished by the time he walked over. Abrams held up an identical map to the one Jacob got the night before. The 2 of them nodded, and the 4 of them walked into the forest. The snow crunched beneath their boots as they walked along the unpaved access road leading deeper into the forest. A gray and depressing sky hung overhead. A snow sky if Flint ever saw one. The wind blew between the naked trees, causing Jacob to button his coat collar up tight and make sure that his hat was firmly on his head. So why carry a gun, Flint? Still were frightened of your mysterious cultists? Summers asked mockingly, gesturing to the shotgun he wore over his shoulder. Jacob saw the bait for what it was and rejected it. Mostly for the wolves and moose. Bears are hibernating by now. So are most of the other critters you'd see in the warmer months. But wolves still hunt in the winter, and we entered moose country the moment we arrived in town. So what's the plan? We're leaving Olivia at an empty Firewatch tower that Anton said we could use as a base camp while we searched. She'll give us drone support while the rest of us continue to search on foot. The tower should be right over there, Abrams explained, pointing up at a ranger tower that just appeared on the horizon. Jacob was not convinced that separating was a good idea, but knowing immediately where Summer's mind would go and not willing to let her make this assignment feel longer than it already was, Jacob politely nodded. Anton told you how to use the security gates for deterring animals, right? He asked. Yes, it doesn't sound too hard, Abrams replied as they continued to walk closer to the watchtower. It shouldn't. They were designed to be operated in a hurry by rangers getting chased by wild animals. And if I remember correctly, they can be opened at both ends in case someone gets caught on the wrong side of a gate. If I'm not, climbing over them shouldn't be too hard, just tedious and impossible to be stealthy with, Jacob replied as they turned off the access road and started walking on the trail up towards the tower. Sounds like an oversight, Summers chimed in as they arrived at the foot of the tower. System was designed for critters without thumbs or the brain power to manipulate simple tools, not people. Though it will stall even people for a minute or two, long enough for you to prepare an appropriate surprise for unwelcome guests. So are we all going to go up or just send Olivia up to make herself at home? Flint replied as he looked around. At the snow-covered base of the watchtower was a gas-powered generator, a small storage head that looked like it was mostly for storing firewood, and a porta-john that reminded all of them that indoor plumbing and sewer connections were about an hour's drive away. As the others started to climb up the stairs to the tower, Jacob checked the generator before seeing about grabbing an armful of firewood. Is there gas in the generator? I give it 50-50 odds. And 62 says no. Is there wood and gas in the shed? I say it's very likely, since that should be part of winter prep, so 61 says yes. The generator was empty, but there was a large red plastic gas can in the shed next to a stack of cordwood taller than he was. Grabbing the gas can, he went out and filled the tank before starting it up. As the generator roared to life, then quieted down to an audible purr, he returned the gas can to the shed and grabbed an armful of firewood before following up after the others. One long hike up a very long wraparound staircase later, Jacob walked in behind the three officers. "All right, I'm here with the firewood," he announced as Olivia finished plugging in her laptop into the tower and setting up her camera drone. "Thanks. I can't believe how cold it is up here. Was that you that also switched the generator on?" Olivia asked. "Yeah, it's got a full tank of gas and enough left in the can for another tank. Got enough wood to last a person for a couple days," he replied, noting that Abrams and Summers were both outside surveying the terrain with binoculars, leaving him alone with Olivia. "So, good to see you again. Didn't think that was going to happen," he began, nervous for reasons he both understood yet couldn't quite describe. 8 years. An opportunity he didn't think he was going to ever get again. Even now, he wasn't sure if he really was getting a second chance here. "Didn't think so either. You were so charming on the plane ride. Shame it had to end," Olivia replied, thinking about when they first met. "Did you make it to your aunt okay? Sorry I had to ditch you so quickly after we touched down in L.A., but I imagine you can figure out why now," Jacob apologized. "Even when I read the report on you, I knew there had to be more to this story. Probably shouldn't have gone looking for it if what you're saying turns out to be true," Olivia lamented. "If it is, we'll survive somehow," he replied. "Are you sure?" "No, but I think we're all committed whether we want to or not at this point," Jacob shrugged. Olivia was silent for a moment, then walked over to a small wooden table between them. She took a small business card and wrote a number on the back before setting it down on the table and sliding it towards Jacob. Jacob's eyes went wide, and he quickly wrote down his own phone number on a napkin he had saved from the diner and traded information with Olivia. With a silent nod, he went back outside to join Summers and Abrams on their perch on the watchtower deck. He wasn't sure how the two of them could have not heard his conversation with Olivia inside the watchtower, but they carried on outside like they hadn't. Both police officers were looking at the horizon in front of them and comparing landmarks they could see to the map Ranger Smith gave them. Jacob looked out at the vista before him as well, as much in contemplation as to study the land he would be searching soon. The fresh snow made the forest look like something out of a painting, dense forests of evergreen trees covered in a light coat of white. A single hiking trail weaved a narrow break in the otherwise uninterrupted forest canopy below. Along that trail would be all the landmarks he discussed with Anton Smith yesterday. According to the map, the trail didn't really branch out until the hikers got to that mysterious hunting lodge they were warned about. "So what's the plan?" he asked at last. "We're going to let Olivia launch a drone and fly it along the trail to that hunting lodge. If she spots anything at any of the landmarks along the way, she'll radio us and we'll head in for a closer look. Otherwise, we'll all just keep moving and start where the Park Service left off," Abrams replied. Jacob shrugged. "Works for me," he nodded in agreement as the three of them made their way down to the base of the tower. As the electric whine of a drone took off above them, the trio took off after it along the trail. The gentle crunch of snow beneath their feet was the only sound other than the occasional howl of the wind. Occasionally there was a sharp crack as a tree branch collapsed under the weight of a particularly large clump of snow, but such sounds were few and far between, and never did anything fall onto the trail in front of them. The first location was the ravine that ran alongside the trail, and while it was a lovely view, Jacob could already tell that they weren't going to find anything here. The cliffs were too smooth and the drop was too deep, and the bottom was too flat beneath the snow. There had to be ice and subsequently water down there. Deep water, judging by how featureless the snow-covered ice looked. There was nowhere to take shelter, no way to climb back up without tools, and no sign that the ice had been disturbed and frozen back over. He shook his head and followed the two officers as the three of them continued down the trail. After the ravine, the trail acquired a downward slope and continued to run alongside the small river before eventually turning a bend, and the snow-covered cabins of a small fishing camp came into view. Flint thought camp was a generous description of 4 cabins situated on either side of the river with a raised wooden bridge connecting them, but it was the next landmark on their trek. "Is there anything of interest relevant to their search in the fishing village that the Park Service somehow missed? I think it's somewhat likely, so yes is 60 or less. 61 on the percentile die. Guess there isn't anything of note." Nothing stood out to Jacob's eye as the three of them crossed the wooden bridge and continued on the trail. The cabins were shut tight, and the snow hadn't been disturbed by anything larger than a rabbit before they came along. All that was left was to continue onward. With the fishing camp behind them, the trio continued on through the woods along a trail that was becoming narrower and narrower. The drone continued to hover overhead, high enough for the whine of the motor to be barely perceptible. In a different time, he would have found the sound annoying, a reminder of a world he tried to ignore. But right now it meant he had someone watching overhead. "Do you see anything, Olivia?" Abrams called over her radio. Okay, does Olivia see anything? Or does she encounter anything unusual? They should be pretty close to the hunting lodge at this point, so it should be very likely at 75 or less. And a 20 on the percentile for the first question, and a 58 on the second. What would she see, though? I see the hunting lodge, and there's definitely some activity. A truck just parked right outside the front door. I wasn't able to see what was inside it, though. There's some interference that's forcing the drone to turn around. And what's that behind you? She reported, throwing the trio into high alert. Abrams and Summers reached for their pistols while Flint tightened his grip on his shotgun and dove for the cover of a nearby tree. His mind briefly shut out the presence of the other 2 cops as he slowly raised his shotgun and peered around the tree. Okay, Jacob makes an active perception check as he tries to spot whatever Olivia is referring to. Got a 21 on a 27 on a 1d20 plus 7. It took him a second to spot what the drone operator was referring to, and another to register that it was real and not his mind playing tricks on him. What he saw almost didn't look real, but given how far away they were from civilization, Jacob had to admit the list of rational explanations was very short. Standing a good 100 yards away from the trio was a figure that even at that distance was much too tall and much too lanky to be human. And it was much too gray. Pulling a pair of binoculars as the others got over their shock and started to follow his lead on getting behind cover, he brought the lenses up to his eyes and looked at the creature that was starting to turn and walk back down the trail towards the fishing camp before veering off into underbrush. What he saw looked like a lanky, gray-furred... Jacob had heard stories of creatures like Bigfoot and Sasquatch, but he never thought creatures like that were anything but stories. Yet what he was watching through his binoculars certainly looked real enough. If it wasn't, someone went through an awful lot of trouble dressing up in one hell of a kick-ass ape-man costume and following them for a good 5 miles into largely pristine state forest. "What was that?" Summers whispered, yet neither of her traveling companions had trouble hearing her. "I have absolutely no idea," Jacob said with a certainty in his voice that left no doubt that he had exceeded the breadth of his knowledge. He quickly put his binoculars away as a thought crossed his mind. Grabbing his own radio, he switched to the channel they were all sharing. "Olivia, can you still see that thing? Is it heading towards your direction at all?" "I can see it. It's staying on your side of the river for now," Olivia replied. Jacob breathed a sigh of relief and instinctively checked the weight of his bandolier of shotgun shells. "Okay, assuming it is behaving like the animals I normally hunt, which is a big if. Whatever it is currently doesn't see us as a threat or as food. At some point we must have passed through its territory, so it started following us and decided we weren't worth its time. Personally, I'm in favor of keeping things that way. I don't know about the rest of you, but I don't have enough shells to pick fights with random cryptozoology exhibits. I probably don't even have enough shells for the fight I think we're facing up ahead." "Agreed, for now. Let's follow the lead we have, and if that doesn't work out, then we'll talk about playing Bigfoot hunters." Abrams nodded. As much as he didn't like it, Jacob knew she was right. If they didn't find Conrad at the lodge, the creature was their next lead. "What are you two scared of? It was only one creature," Summers interjected, getting an eye roll from Jacob. "Yes, and it's probably heading back to its nest now, where there might be a mate or young. If there's a mate, that doubles our potential problems. If there's young, most creatures won't back down an inch if they think we're threatening their offspring, and the FBI is not paying me anywhere nearly enough to deal with that. Seriously, Summers, did you survive Australia by hiding in Perth all the time?" Jacob snarled. "Enough, both of you. Let's move on to the lodge and see what's going on there. I'm already not looking forward to having to write out this report," Abrams interrupted and motioned for them to continue down the trail. With nothing else to say, Summers and Flint silently followed after her as the trail narrowed and twisted until it widened again. As it started to widen out and open up into a small clearing, Flint picked up the subtle signs of activity as well as more overt signs. The hunting lodge was a relatively small but surprisingly impressive building built in the style of an old log cabin. Jacob imagined it would have been a hassle to build it this far from civilization, but apparently someone had the resources and connections to make it happen. Built in the center of the clearing, it seemed impossible to sneak up on. If it were the summer, Flint would have been willing to take his chances sneaking through some tall grass, but most of the grass was buried beneath several inches of snow. The tree line was currently the only thing keeping the three of them hidden. There were plenty of signs of activity, though. Branches and falling logs had been cleared away, and the bright red of a candy bar wrapper stood out against the unspoiled white of snow. And a large cargo truck was currently being unloaded in front of the building. cargo truck that drove up an unpaved dirt access road that wasn't on the map they were given, Jacob was quick to notice. Oracle time. Did the lodge gathering notice Olivia's drone? I give it a 50-50 chance. 13 on the percentile. Yes they did. The front of the lodge was a flurry of activity as the truck was hastily unloaded and several armed individuals filtered out of the lodge and started heading in the direction of Olivia's hideout and the trio currently hiding in the trees. Jacob's blood ran cold as he looked at the masked figures dressed in dull earth-tone robes and overcoats. Each one covered their face with an ornate wooden mask that resembled some sort of animal predator. Wolves, bears, foxes, minks. One lion leading from the rear. He had seen these masks and the people that wore them before. He wore their branding on his forearm. Abrams was just about to motion for them to quietly head back away when two things happened. The first was that they spotted Conrad being forced to help unload the parked truck at gunpoint. The second was something that even Jacob, with his antagonistic view of Summers, did not see coming. The AFP officer walked out past the tree line and waved at the approaching individuals. "Oi! Oi! Midnight Owl! They're over here!" She shouted, giving something that sounded suspiciously like a passphrase before ratting out Abrams and Flint. What in the actual F? Flint thought briefly before the realization fully hit him that he needed to run. Right now. Without even looking to see if Abrams was behind him, he turned and ran into the forest. Voices shouted somewhere behind him as he ran off the trail and deeper into the woods. Back to the present. The wind continued to howl and blow blinding gusts of snow past Jacob as he trudged through the fresh snow. It looked like the expected blizzard came early, which was both a blessing and a curse. Adrenaline continued to pump through his veins, the only warmth he felt as he struggled to get his bearings. The moment he figured out where he was, he could start planning his next move. "Jacob?" A voice crackled softly over his radio. He kept it as silent as he could without shutting it off. Taking shelter beneath a particularly large fir tree, he forced his cold hands to clasp the radio on his shoulder. Olivia, is that you? What are you still doing here?" Okay, asking the Oracle, did Abrams escape the ambush as well? I give it a somewhat likely at 60% or less. 54. "Abrams made it back a few minutes ago and told me what happened. I've been trying to get a hold of you since she got back," Olivia replied, her signal coming in clearer, which meant he couldn't be that far from the watchtower. "She made it? Good," he exhaled, listening to see if he was being followed. Okay. Making a perception check with a 1d20 plus 7. 15 in total. Oracle, is there anything for him to hear? I give it a 50-50. And 67 says no. Reasonably certain there was nothing lying in wait for him to drop his guard, Jacob stepped out from under the fir tree. "Sorry, I gotta find some shelter before I freeze. I'll be with you in a minute." He apologized and shut off his radio before focusing on figuring out how to backtrack to the watchtower, or failing that, the fishing camp. Okay, making a survival check with a 1d20 plus 5. Got a 21. So I'm going to say that despite all the penalties stacked against him, intense cold, darkness, and deafening wind, he manages to find his way back to the trail and towards the fishing camp. After walking for what felt like forever in the biting cold, he found his way back to the trail just as the familiar shadows of the cabins of the small fishing camp appeared into view. Excitement welled up inside of him as he pressed on and tried the door to the first cabin he came upon. Thanking the Park Service for small mercies, Jacob found it was unlocked and slipped inside. Inside the rustic one-room cabin that unsurprisingly still smelled of fish, he found a small stone fireplace and a woodpile stacked with logs. Shutting and locking the door behind him, he made sure to shutter the one window the best he could before getting a fire started in the fireplace. A few minutes later, the warm, cheerful glow of a small fire crackled in front of him and warmed his tired body. Smiling contentedly, he took a seat on the floor facing the only door in or out of the cabin. With his shotgun pointed squarely at the door, he switched his radio back on. "All right. Can you two hear me?" he asked. "Where are you?" Abrams asked over the radio. "Back in the fishing camp we walked past on the hike to the lodge. I'm currently hiding in one of the cabins. Got a fire going in the fireplace. They shouldn't be able to see the smoke this late in the day, and I'd freeze if I went much longer without something," he answered. "And what the hell was that with Summers?" "I have no idea. Definitely did not expect her to do that," Abrams replied, sounding as confused as he was. "Well, at least we know where Conrad is and that he's still alive, even though getting him out became that much harder. You going to call for backup or have a plan B?" Jacob asked, exhaling as he tried to warm his extremities, starting by rubbing some feeling back into his hands. "I can't, but I imagine you suspected as much. Before I left, they warned me that there would be difficulties getting another team up here, so I was on my own." "Of course there would be," he replied as he took his boots off and started rubbing some feeling into his feet. "So do we have a plan B, or are we all going to have to take this as a loss?" he added as he put his boots back on. "The investigation has been compromised. We'll have to get out and contact the local sheriff and see if they can help," Abrams grumbled with an almost primal growl that was still perceptible over the radio. She liked losing as much as Jacob did, but he had to admit that the odds that they could get this guy were looking slimmer and slimmer. Okay, Oracle time again. Did Conrad escape in the chaos and stumble upon where Jacob was hiding? This is very unlikely, almost hilariously so, but let's have the dice decide. And 71 is definitely not below 25%, so yeah, we're not stretching anyone's suspension of disbelief with this question. Jacob contemplated his options as he put his boots back on. If he was lucky, that thing they encountered this morning would have been hiding somewhere until the storm was over, which meant that right now it was just him and a whole lot of traffickers with ties to a conspiracy organization that even he wasn't fully sure how far their reach went. Okay, did the trackers catch up with Jacob? I give this one a 50-50, and 66 says no. Looks like Jacob is still safe for now. His clothes dried off. Jacob extinguished the fire with a small pile of snow. The storm made it virtually impossible to do anything right now. If he didn't freeze to death, he would have lost the trail and wandered around lost like an idiot until someone, likely someone unfriendly, found him. There was nothing to do except wait until morning and hope that the storm lightened up by then. So, with some reluctance, he made sure the door opened inward, barricaded it with a sturdy oak table, then went to sleep to the sound of something whistling in the distance. It was probably just the wind. Early the next morning, Jacob woke up to find his decision made for him. Something was banging on the door, loud enough to wake him up, but thankfully not strong enough to break the door down. Whoever it was, it obviously wasn't the ladies, as neither of them had the muscle mass to nearly rattle the door off its hinges. Rather than let whoever was trying to get in ruin a perfectly good door, he decided to stop keeping Destiny waiting. "All right, I'm coming, asshole. Give me a minute to move the table out of the way," Jacob replied. Setting his shotgun down on the table, he pulled the table back towards him. As the door opened and a masked trafficker started to force his way into the cabin, Jacob grabbed his shotgun and pulled the trigger in the general direction of the wolf-masked trafficker. Okay, making a free attack roll as his attacker gave up on any pretense of stealth. His opponent is a cult initiate. Rolling a 1d20 plus 3 for an 8 with Jacob's pump-action shotgun. An 8 does not beat a 12 defense. Well, this is off to a great start already. Unfortunately, in the process of moving the table and getting a shot off at once, the shot went wild and missed the target by a fair margin. There was a long pause as both men registered what had just happened and their ears rang violently. And now we roll for initiative. Flint is an 8 on a 1d20 plus 1, and the cult initiate is a 10 on a 1d20 plus 1. Recovering his wits first, the wolf-masked cultist drew a large knife and reached over the table to take a swing at Jacob. Bless this hunt with blood! Takes a swing for 1d20 plus 3, 15 on the dot. He barely connects and does 3 points of damage. Jacob has 26 HP left. Leaning back, Jacob almost avoided the attack. Almost. The very tip of the long dagger cut into the hunter's shoulder and drew blood as a sharp pain jolted him the rest of the way awake. Ow! He shouted and cocked his shotgun before pulling the trigger again. Okay. 8 on his attack roll again. Once again, the shot went wild, and this time sprayed the awning above the door with buckshot. Pumping another round into the chamber, he tried to kick the table into his opponent to put some space between the two of them. Okay, endurance check. And that's a 1d10. That's a d10 on a 1. That's a 10 on a 1d20 plus 3. Yeah, that table's not going anywhere, and that ends Jacob's turn. As the table shook from Jacob's ineffective kick, the cultist swung again. 14 on a 1d20 plus 3, and that's thankfully a miss. The blade narrowly missed Jacob's other shoulder as the hunter dodged out of the way just in time. Jacob pulled the trigger a third time. 18 on a 1d20 plus 3. That definitely hits. 2d6 gets me 4 damage. Not great, but still almost half of the cult initiate's hit points. That's a fodder enemy. Finally, Jacob landed a shot and hit the cultist squarely in the chest. As his opponent was thrown back out of the cabin by the force of the blow, Jacob pushed the table to the side and calmly walked out of the cabin. As the dying cultist laid in the snow, Jacob chambered another round into his shotgun and quickly replaced the 3 spent shells. Should have run to get your friends, psycho. His opponent coughed blood. The Lodge always gets its prey in the end. Not even the legendary Axman, Jacob Flint, gets away forever. Praise the great horned one, the god of pleasure and sport. Jacob was silent for a second, then shook his head. Praise this, he replied before kicking the dying initiate squarely in the face. Bone, cartilage, and carved wood crunched beneath his sturdy hiking boot as his opponent went limp and died. With his position already given away, his radio busted in the fight, and the other members of the lodge likely not far off, Jacob decided to just go for broke at this point. Eyes on the trail leading back to the hunting lodge, taken over by the lodge, and ignoring the hilarious irony and their lack of creativity when it came to selecting a hideout, he concentrated and focused his mind on the task ahead. Okay, Jacob is going to make a survival check to try and navigate back to the lodge without alerting his opponents. 22 on a 1d20 plus 3. Looks like the dice are finally warming up to me tonight. Ears sharp, he started to walk walk along the trail but quickly veered off of it, occasionally pausing to double back and sweep away his footprints in the fresh snow. The hunting lodge soon loomed in front of him. Most of the activity was behind him. Now he just needed to slip in, find Conrad, and try to slip out. All right. Jacob has not used his hunter's mark ability at all this adventure. Time to change that. I'm going to spend one focus point to use Hunter's Mark on Conrad Brooks to gain advantage on tracking him down and finding him to represent Jacob's determination not to return from this mission completely empty-handed. Alright, where would you hide him? He's tech-savvy and you clearly put him to work. And this is an old building that has not been upgraded to the digital age. Jacob mused as he quietly sneaked through the seemingly empty hunting lodge and noticed the signs of data cables being strung out in a hurry. Okay, making a perception check to try and find where they would keep Conrad. 1d20 plus 9 and 25. Yeah, he definitely finds Conrad, all right. Following the cables upstairs and keeping an ear open for lingering guards, Jacob's feet quietly carried him right outside a bedroom that had been converted into a small computer room. From the doorway, he caught a glimpse of Conrad and heard an unfortunately familiar voice. "What did I tell you, cousin? Easiest money we've ever made," came the familiar voice of Eyes, the drone operator that had escaped Jacob's wrath the last time the two men fought. "Now take the controls while I go get us something to drink from down in the kitchen. I'd get one of those lovely girls they brought yesterday to do it, but the bosses insist on keeping them in the basement while the badge men are sniffing around." He cackled evilly while getting out of his chair. Okay, does Jacob use his opportunity to sneak in? Stealth check. 1d20 plus 3, unnatural 20. As Eyes stood up and turned around, he found himself staring right down the barrel of Jacob's shotgun. The perceptive hunter wore his angriest scowl as he let his index finger rest inside the trigger guard. "Merry Christmas, asshole," he barked before turning to Conrad. "Conrad Brooks, I'm Jacob Flint. I was sent to find you." "Jacob Flint? So you are the Axman after all." Eyes glared. "Axman? You're the bloke those lodge blokes are all scared of." Even if Jacob hadn't read Conrad's file and saw his nationality, there was still no mistaking that Australian accent. "You're getting us out, right?" Conrad added. Jacob was not surprised by the use of us instead of me. "Yeah, and your cousin is going to lead the way. And if he doesn't help me and cooperate with the feds later, then he can explain to the lodge higher-ups how he failed to stop me. Again. And I don't remember them being the understanding type," Jacob replied. Both men looked at him, Conrad with hope and Eyes with a scowl that said, "I hate that you're right," better than any words could. The three of them walked back downstairs and out the front door towards the cargo truck that was still parked outside. Eyes was in front, Jacob following right behind him with his shotgun at the ready, and a look on his face that made it clear he wouldn't think twice about shooting Eyes in the back if he tried something. "You got the keys for this thing?" Jacob asked Eyes coldly. They're left in the truck. No one here expects a crazy redneck to sneak through the woods to start trouble," Eyes replied, glaring back at Jacob. Forcing Eyes to get behind the wheel and motioning for Conrad to hop into the back seat, Jacob took the front passenger seat. Once everyone was in, Jacob motioned for Eyes to start the truck and drive. The truck roared to life with a throaty diesel engine, and soon they were racing down the snowy road. Flint wasn't entirely sure where it led, but if the lodge was using it to transport cargo to their hideout, it had to connect to the main highway somewhere. As the forest passed by them in a slow blur, Eyes apparently felt the need to start talking. "Well, I imagine you're happy. The fight you had at the fishing camp scared off your friends and spooked the ranger. They all ran off to call the sheriff and probably got the next best thing to an FBI SWAT team together." Jacob was many things but not stupid. He recognized a ploy to gain his trust and get him to drop his guard. Still, if Eyes was telling the truth, then that was good news for a lot of reasons. There might still be a chance to save the others that he knew he had to leave behind. "Yeah, that's good news. Assuming you're not bullshitting me into lowering this gun long enough for you to take your hands off the wheel and make a grab for it," he replied coldly. Eyes grinned evilly as the dirt road led out into an empty stretch of highway. "Can't blame me for trying, but it's true. If you had just hid out a little while longer, help would have arrived. Your friend smashed my radio trying to kill me. I did the best with what I knew at the time. Wait, I know where we are," he replied just as they came up to the park entrance and a police blockade. Without prodding, Eyes slowed the truck down to a crawl and pulled up alongside the sheriff's patrol car with the biggest smile on his face. Jacob already knew what stunt he was going to pull and was thinking of how to defuse the impending situation when they both saw the person that was standing right next to the deputy. "Jacob Flint?" Abrams asked incredulously. "Special Agent Abrams." "Damn, that was fast," he replied, equally dumbfounded. "So, why do you have a man at gunpoint, Jacob? And how did you find our missing person, Conrad Brooks?" Abram asked with a raised eyebrow as she looked at both of the men Jacob was traveling with and the position the hunter was in. Jacob relaxed his shotgun and pointed it down towards the passenger cabin floor. Now it was his turn to smile. "Eyes, this is Special Agent Abrams of the FBI. Abrams, this is Eyes, the drone operator that escaped after last little adventure together back in October." "He's lying! My cousin and I were just camping in the woods and this nutter kidnapped us at gunpoint," Eyes interjected. "That wouldn't be the strangest thing that happened to me today. How about you get out of the truck and we'll get it straightened out," Abrams replied diplomatically, clearly not believing Eyes, but not attempting to escalate the situation after Jacob took the weapon largely out of play. Eyes gave Jacob a baleful glare, but put the truck in park and turned off the ignition. Jacob in turn let go of the breath he didn't realize he had been holding. For now it was over. He had won this round. Once out of the truck and temporarily disarmed by the county sheriff department, Jacob learned two things. One, an unidentified helicopter had been seen flying into the park while Jacob was driving out with the two Australian cousins. Two, Eyes was an absolutely horrible liar and seemed completely oblivious to that fact. The "we were just camping and this crazy Yank kidnapped us" story was quickly changed when it was clear that the timeline of events wasn't making sense, and changed 3 times since then. Given Australia's own history of police corruption, Jacob thought Eyes would have known better than to lie to cops. Meanwhile, it didn't take them particularly long to verify Jacob's identity, and he was given his weapons back, just in time for Abrams and him to lead the sheriff and his deputies into the forest. The second hike into the forest went much more quickly than the first. Fresh snow from last night's blizzard may have buried their tracks, but Jacob still remembered the trail quite well. Soon they were at the lodge, and almost immediately he knew something was wrong. The activity from the day before was gone. The building was completely still. There was a flattened circular area in front where a helicopter had clearly landed and blew small drifts of fresh snow around in a circle before taking off again. But there was nothing now. And when they searched the inside of the building, there was evidence that the place had been abandoned in a hurry all around. Breakfasts were half eaten on the table. Hard drives and desktops were smashed in the computer room. The basement was open to reveal rows of empty animal cages with evidence they contained animals of the human variety. They were too late. Anything that could have told them where the lodge had escaped to was gone. End of story.